The envelope wasn't marked urgent. But it shattered my life in an instant. Inside was a single photo, my husband, smiling, holding hands with a woman I'd never seen before. 3 weeks ago, he told me he was on a business trip. That was the moment I realized everything I believed was a lie. And I wasn't about to let it stay buried. Margo had always believed she had a perfect life. The kind of life that people dream of: successful business, beautiful twin daughters, and a husband who, despite his occasional mood swings, seemed fully committed to their little family. On the surface, everything appeared flawless. Her furniture business was thriving, the girls were bright and full of energy, and Liam, her husband, had always been the supportive partner. He'd promised her he would always be there, through thick and thin. Life, in Margo's eyes, had unfolded in the way she'd always hoped. Then came that envelope. It wasn't anything special at first glance. Just a plain white envelope, sitting on the kitchen counter, amidst the usual stack of bills and junk mail. But there was something about it that made Margo's heart race the moment she saw it. No return address, just her name written neatly in block letters. The simplicity of it was almost too perfect. The kind of simplicity that hides something sinister, something dark. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the envelope, and for a moment, she simply stared at it. What could this be? It wasn't a bill, not something she'd been expecting. Her mind wandered. Was it a mistake? Maybe it was from one of her suppliers, or even a surprise invitation to a special event. But no. Deep down, she knew that wasn't the case. There was a strange weight in the air, something she couldn't place, but it gnawed at her. Her mind flashed to 1,000 possibilities, each darker than the last. Could it be bad news about the business? Or worse, about Liam? Her heart clenched, a cold shiver crawling down her spine. For years, Margo had pushed aside the small, nagging feelings of doubt whenever Liam came home late from a business trip or when his phone calls became more secretive. The subtle changes in his behavior had made her uneasy, but she had dismissed them. She was just being paranoid, she told herself. But now, as she stared at the envelope, she realized she could no longer ignore that unsettling feeling. The girls were in the living room, distracted by their favorite cartoons. Sophie and Lily were still young, blissfully unaware of the world's darker side. Margo knew they would be devastated if they ever found out the truth. But the truth was now knocking at her door. The envelope, it was a sign. She couldn't wait any longer. She slid her finger under the flap, her hands shaking as she opened it. A single photograph slipped out, face down. A photograph of Liam. But not the Liam she knew. The Liam in the picture was sitting at a dimly lit restaurant, leaning across the table toward a woman Margo didn't recognize. The woman's hand was resting on Liam's arm, her fingers wrapped intimately around his wrist. The timestamp on the corner read 3 weeks ago. The exact same time Liam had told Margo he was closing a major real estate deal in Chicago. Margo's heart pounded in her chest. The world seemed to tilt beneath her. Everything she thought she knew about her life, about Liam, was suddenly in question. The perfect life she had built was shattering before her eyes. "Mommy, can we have apple slices?" Sophie's innocent voice snapped her back to reality. Margo quickly shoved the photo and the note back into the envelope, forcing a smile as she turned to her daughter. "Of course, sweetie," she said, her voice sounding far steadier than she felt. "Go back to watching TV with your sister. I'll bring them in a minute." Her phone buzzed, breaking the fragile calm she had just created. She glanced at the message. It was from Liam, stuck in traffic. "Don't wait up for dinner." Margo stared at the text, her mind spinning. He'd been stuck in traffic a lot lately. How many times had she let that excuse slide without question? Late nights at the office, mysterious phone calls that he always took outside, his growing distance over the past few months, all of it suddenly made sense. The laughter of her daughters from the living room echoed in her ears, but it felt distant, like it was happening in another world. Her world. Their world. It was all starting to feel like a lie. Margo pulled her phone out again, fingers hovering over Zoe's number. her best friend. Zoe would tell her to confront Liam, to demand the truth. But something held Margo back. What if there was more? What if this wasn't just about the affair? What else had Liam been hiding? She didn't know if she was ready for the full truth, but it seemed like it was coming for her, whether she was ready or not. Before she could make the call, the doorbell rang, making her jump. She peered through the peephole and saw Helen, her mother-in-law, standing on the porch. Perfect timing, as always. Helen's rigid posture and uninvited presence only added to the tension in the air. As Margo opened the door, Helen air-kissed her cheek and stepped inside. "I was in the neighborhood," she said, sweeping her eyes around the house, "and thought I'd stop by to see my granddaughters." Margo felt the envelope burning in her back pocket, but she didn't react. "Is Liam home?" Helen asked, her gaze darting around the house, searching for any signs of him. Margo's mind raced. Did Helen know? Had she always known? "Traffic," Margo replied shortly, trying to keep her voice steady. She watched her mother-in-law's face for any reaction. "Is Liam home?" she repeated. "Traffic," Margo said, forcing herself to stand tall. Helen clicked her tongue. "That boy works too hard, but then the Donovan men have always been dedicated providers," she said, her voice casual, almost dismissive. Then, as if she were trying to ease the tension, she added, "Speaking of Donovan, have you and Liam considered trying again for a boy this time?" Margo felt the weight of the envelope press against her side. It was almost as if Helen could feel it too. She glanced down at the envelope, knowing that the truth was close, but her mind wasn't ready to face it yet. "Actually, Helen," Margo said, her voice tight with the strain of the moment, "now isn't a good time. The girls need their dinner, and I have some work to finish." She pressed her lips together, dismissing her mother-in-law's subtle criticism. Helen's eyes narrowed slightly, but she nodded, her usual disapproving gaze softening for a moment. "Of course, dear. Just remember, the Donovan name needs to be carried on." Her words hung in the air as Margo closed the door, a firm click echoing through the hallway. The tension in her chest tightened. The truth was waiting, and Margo could no longer ignore it. She knew what she had to do, but the question remained, was she ready for what she might find? And what would happen once she opened the envelope? This was only the beginning, and the answers were just out of reach. But one thing was clear, her life was about to change forever. Margo stared at the photograph in disbelief, her fingers trembling as she gripped the edges of the glossy paper. The picture seemed to mock her, its perfect composition a cruel reflection of everything she thought she knew. Liam was sitting across a table in a dimly lit restaurant, a woman leaning close to him, her fingers draped over his wrist in an intimate gesture. The timestamp in the corner of the photograph confirmed the unthinkable. It was taken 3 weeks ago, around the same time Liam had claimed to be in Chicago closing a business deal. The woman's face was unfamiliar, a stranger, and yet in that moment, she felt as though she knew her intimately, as if she had always been there, lurking in the shadows of Margo's perfect world. Her heart raced as she read the note that came with the photo. The words seemed to burn into her mind, "Thought you should know what your husband does on his business trips to Chicago." The sentence seemed so simple, yet it carried the weight of everything Margo had built, the foundation of trust that had been carefully constructed over the years. The perfect family, the successful business, the life she had worked so hard to create, now all of it was crumbling before her eyes. She had always believed in their love, in their devotion to each other, but this was a betrayal so deep, so painful, that it threatened to consume her. Margo felt as if the floor had been ripped from beneath her. Her hands shook violently as she shoved the photo and note back into the envelope, trying desperately to hold herself together. She couldn't breathe. The room felt too small, suffocating. How could this be happening? How could Liam, the man she loved, the man who had promised to always be there, betray her in this way? The laughter of her twin daughters, Sophie and Lily, drifted in from the living room, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside her. They were too young, too innocent to understand the depth of what was happening. They still believed in their father, in the perfect family that Margo had tried so hard to preserve. The thought of shattering their world, of them seeing their mother's pain, was unbearable. She couldn't let them see this side of their father. Not yet. With a heavy sigh, Margo forced herself to take a step back. She took a deep breath, trying to calm the whirlwind of emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. She couldn't let fear and anger control her. Not now. She needed to think. She needed to make sense of this. But the questions kept piling up, one after another, each more painful than the last. How long had this been going on? How many lies had Liam told? What else was he hiding? Was their marriage ever real, or had it all been a facade? The doorbell rang, startling Margo from her thoughts. She glanced at the clock. It was late. Who could it be? She moved toward the door, her legs feeling as if they were made of stone. Through the peephole, she saw Helen, her mother-in-law, standing on the doorstep, as rigid as always, her expression unreadable. Perfect timing, Margo thought bitterly. Perfect timing for the woman who had always expected so much from Margo to appear right when everything was falling apart. "Margo, dear," Helen said as Margo opened the door, air kissing her cheek in her usual formal manner. "I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by to see my granddaughters." Her voice was polite, almost forced, and Margo felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She stepped aside to let her in, trying her best to mask the turmoil that churned inside her. "Is Liam home?" Helen asked, her eyes scanning the house as she made her way through the foyer. Her gaze lingered for a moment on the empty space, as if she expected to see him there, as if she already knew something was wrong. "Traffic," Margo replied curtly, her voice betraying none of the fear and confusion swirling inside her. She watched Helen's face closely for any sign of recognition, any hint that she knew. Had Helen known about this all along? Had she always suspected something? But Helen's expression remained impassive, as if she hadn't just entered a house where everything was about to shatter. "That boy works too hard," Helen muttered, shaking her head. "But then, the Donovan men have always been dedicated providers." She paused, her gaze shifting toward Margo, giving her that familiar, condescending look that she knew all too well. "Speaking of Donovan, have you and Liam considered trying again for a boy?" The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken expectations. Margo could feel the envelope burning a hole in her back pocket. She wanted to scream, to throw it in Helen's face, to tell her everything. But she couldn't. Not yet. Not in front of her daughters, who were still too young to understand the weight of the world crashing down on their mother's shoulders. "Actually, Helen, now isn't a good time," Margo said, her voice tight with the strain of the moment. "The girls need their dinner, and I have some work to finish." She pushed back the emotions threatening to overwhelm her, but Helen pressed on, her disappointment clear in the way she pursed her lips. "Of course, dear. Just remember," Helen said, her voice softening, "the Donovan name needs to be carried on." The words felt like a slap in the face, as if Helen could see nothing beyond her own selfish desires for the family to uphold an image of perfection. Margo closed the door firmly, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The storm inside her had only intensified. The perfect life, the perfect family, was a lie. And she was beginning to understand that the truth would come at a cost. But there was no turning back now. As the evening wore on, Margo found herself staring at the photograph again, studying the woman's face. She was younger than Margo, probably in her late 20s, with an artistic, free-spirited vibe that Margo had never seen in her own life. She felt a strange mix of jealousy and disgust. Everything this woman had, everything she represented, was everything Margo wasn't. The girls' voices drifted in from the living room, a sharp contrast to the dark thoughts racing through Margo's mind. She tucked the photograph and note back into the envelope, stuffing it into her purse. The envelope felt heavier now, as if it carried not just the weight of the truth, but also the weight of Margo's shattered illusions. Her phone buzzed, and for a moment, Margo thought it was Liam. But it wasn't. It was a text from an unknown number. Her heart skipped a beat as she read the words, "Check your business accounts." Margo felt a chill wash over her. Was there more to this? Was Liam hiding something even bigger? The thought of it made her stomach turn. She couldn't ignore it any longer. She had to face the truth. But how far would she go? How deep was the betrayal? And what was she willing to sacrifice to uncover the full extent of Liam's lies? The answers, she realized, would change everything. She put down the phone, determination flooding through her. She would protect her daughters, protect herself, no matter the cost. Tomorrow, she would confront Liam. Tomorrow, everything would change. Margo stood at the kitchen counter, the photograph still clutched tightly in her hand, the weight of it threatening to crush her. The image of Liam, her husband, leaning close to another woman, their hands touching in a way that made Margo's chest tighten, felt like a betrayal so deep it left no room for air. Her mind raced, replaying every moment over the past few months, the late nights at work, the secretive phone calls, the distance that had grown between them. But none of it, not a single moment, had prepared her for the crushing reality before her. Liam had lied to her, not only about his whereabouts but about his intentions, about everything. And now, here she stood, holding a photograph that proved it beyond any doubt. The note accompanying the picture felt like a cruel joke. Thought you should know what your husband does on his business trips to Chicago. The words seemed to mock her, to shatter every assumption she had about the man she loved, the life they had built together. With trembling hands, she stuffed the photograph and the note back into the envelope. She couldn't look at it anymore. Not yet. There was too much to process, too much to understand. Her heart was heavy, her mind racing with questions. How could he do this to her? To their daughters? What had happened to the man she had married? Was it all a lie? The sound of Sophie's voice calling her from the living room broke through the fog in her mind. Mommy, where are the apple slices? Margo quickly wiped her eyes, forcing a smile, and walked into the living room, tucking the envelope deep into her purse. Of course, sweetie. Go sit down with your sister. Mommy will bring them right in. As she prepared the snacks, Margo's phone buzzed with a text from Liam. Stuck in traffic, don't wait up for dinner. The words felt like a slap in the face, a reminder of everything that had slipped past her while she was caught up in the routine of family life. The lies, the deceit, the emotional distance, it had all been building to this moment. Margo stood frozen, staring at the screen, when the sound of little feet padding across the floor broke her from her reverie. Sophie, her innocent twin daughter, appeared in the doorway, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Where's Daddy? She asked in her soft, childlike voice. Margo's heart ached. How could she explain to her daughter that the man she adored had betrayed their family in the worst way? How could she protect her from the truth? She scooped Sophie up, burying her face in her daughter's hair for a moment to steady her racing thoughts. Daddy had to go to work early, sweetheart, she whispered, her voice trembling with the weight of the words. After tucking Sophie back into bed, Margo sat in the quiet of the kitchen, her mind racing. The envelope burned a hole in her purse. She knew she couldn't ignore it anymore. She had to confront Liam. But how? What would she say? What did she even want to hear? She needed answers, but she was also afraid of what those answers would mean for their family. The clock on the microwave read 11:43 when Liam finally walked through the door. He smiled that smile, the one that used to make her heart skip a beat. But now, it felt hollow. She could barely stand to look at him. You're still up? He asked, his voice light, as though nothing was wrong. We need to talk, Margo said, her voice firm, a tremor of fear and anger lacing her words. She placed the envelope on the counter, between them, her hand shaking slightly as she slid it across the granite surface. Liam's expression remained unchanged as he loosened his tie. Can it wait until morning? I'm exhausted. No, Margo said, her voice rising with emotion. It can't. She took a deep breath and pushed the photograph across the counter toward him. Who is she? She asked, her voice barely a whisper, the weight of the question hanging in the air. Liam glanced at the photo but didn't pick it up. A client, he said quickly, his tone defensive, almost dismissive. Where did you get this? A client? Margo's voice cracked with disbelief. A client who holds your wrist like that? She leaned in, her gaze sharp. Don't insult my intelligence, Liam. Liam ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture Margo had once found endearing. You're being paranoid, Margo. It was just a business dinner. Riley's an interior designer I'm working with on the Chicago project. Riley, Margo repeated, the name sticking in her throat like something sour. That's the name you just gave her. Without thinking. That project was supposed to be finished 3 weeks ago. Why are you lying? Liam's face flushed, and he shifted uncomfortably. Things got complicated, he muttered, moving toward the refrigerator. He didn't meet her gaze as he opened it, his back to her. You know how these things go. Sometimes they take longer than expected. Margo watched him carefully, her heart sinking. She knew he was lying, but she couldn't understand why. The frustration and anger built inside her, threatening to spill over. She wasn't stupid. She had seen the signs, late nights, secretive phone calls, his growing distance. But she had brushed it off, convinced herself she was being paranoid. She crossed her arms and leaned against the counter. Complicated, huh, she said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. Is that why you've been working late every night? Is that why you've been so distant? Because of this complicated project? Liam's shoulders tensed at the mention of his mother, and Margo noticed the change in his expression. What did my mother want? He asked, trying to steer the conversation away. The usual, Margo replied bitterly. Wondering when we're going to try for her precious grandson. Liam's face hardened, and he turned to her. What's that supposed to mean? He snapped, the anger rising in his voice.